A mafia boss saw a poor single mother returning her baby's milk. What he did next shocked everyone. She returned her baby's milk, humiliated at the counter, until the man behind her whispered, "Add it to my bill." But when she looked back, she didn't see a stranger. She saw danger itself. And that single act of mercy would drag both their lives into a storm no one would survive. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. No one noticed her at first. Under the cold hum of flickering supermarket lights, Thelma Todd clutched her crying baby close, one arm wrapped protectively around tiny Adeline, the other fumbling through a nearly empty wallet. The checkout line felt endless. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale cereal. At 26, Thelma looked older, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights and not enough hope. Her daughter needed formula again, the kind her fragile stomach could handle. The can sat at the top of her basket like an impossible luxury. $31.40, the cashier said flatly. Thelma froze. She had counted twice before leaving home. She knew she didn't have enough, but she had prayed, foolishly, for a discount, a miracle, something. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry, she whispered, sliding the can back across the conveyor belt. I'll return this one. The metal edge clanged softly as it hit the counter. The sound seemed to echo louder than it should have. People behind her shifted, impatient, pretending not to watch. But judgment filled the silence, sharp, invisible, suffocating. She forced a brittle smile, though her eyes stung. It's fine. She'll be fine, she muttered, kissing her baby's head. But nothing about that moment was fine. A few steps behind her, Charles Lucky Luciano stood perfectly still. He wore a dark suit, crisp and precise, out of place among the flickering aisles of cheap groceries. Tattoos crept up his neck. His eyes, cold steel under the lights, watched the scene without blinking. He'd seen fear before. Broken men begging. Enemies trembling. But this quiet surrender of a mother giving back her child's food, cut deeper than any bullet ever had. Thelma gathered what little she could afford and walked toward the exit, her baby's whimpers fading into the hum of checkout beeps. Lucky's jaw flexed. Add the milk, he said quietly. The cashier froze mid-scan. Lucky's gaze didn't move, and bagged two more. Everyone knew better than to argue with him. As the bags were filled, Lucky slipped a folded bill onto the counter and turned toward the door. Through the glass, he could still see her, a small figure disappearing into the dark parking lot, clutching her baby like the world might take her next breath away. He didn't yet understand why that image burned itself into his mind. Only that it did, and that it wouldn't let go. Sometimes, one stranger's pain can strip the humanity bare from even the coldest heart. The question is, what do you do when the face of mercy looks back at you? That night, the most feared man in the city made a decision he'd spend the rest of his life answering for. As Lucky walked out of the store, the sound of rain on asphalt filled his silence. Somewhere between guilt and curiosity, something in him broke free from habit. He had lived his whole life by one rule: never get involved. But that night, beneath the dim light of a grocery store sign, that rule shattered. What began as a gesture of pity was about to ignite a chain of loyalty, danger, and redemption that would change both their lives forever. The rain had started just as she stepped outside. Thin, icy drops that soaked through her coat before she even reached the bus stop. The streetlights buzzed faintly, halos of pale gold breaking through the drizzle. Thelma sat on the cold metal bench, her baby pressed tightly to her chest. Adeline whimpered, a weak, hungry sound that twisted Thelma's stomach with guilt. She rocked her gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. I promise. I'll make it okay." Promises were easy to make when no one was listening. She stared at the empty road, praying for the distant rumble of a bus that never seemed to come. The grocery bag at her feet looked even smaller now. A few cans, some bread, a handful of cheap essentials. Nothing that could stretch through the week. And the one thing she needed most gone. The sound of footsteps made her stiffen. Heavy, deliberate. Not the careless shuffle of a passerby, but the steady rhythm of someone who walked with intent. A deep voice cut through the night. "I think you forgot this." She looked up, startled, and there he was. The man from the store. The one in the black suit who had stared too long. Water beaded off his broad shoulders as he held out a bag. Inside, She saw the unmistakable blue and white can of formula. Her heart jumped to her throat. I didn't forget it, she said quickly, her voice tight, defensive. I couldn't afford it. I know. His tone was calm, almost too calm. That's why I bought it. She blinked, uncertain if she'd heard him right. The words sounded unreal. People didn't do this. Not for her. Not in this city. I can't take that, she said, shaking her head. You don't even know me. He shrugged, his expression unreadable. Don't need to. The baby started crying again, a small, broken wail that cracked through the rain. Thelma's composure faltered. Her instincts, her pride, collided with the sound of her daughter's hunger. She wanted to refuse, to cling to dignity, but Adeline's cry silenced every argument. Her trembling fingers reached out. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. He handed her the bag, his movements slow, deliberate, as if trying not to scare her. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall, sharp features, tattoos like inked confessions peeking from under his collar. Yet his eyes weren't cruel. Not tonight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were rain and the soft hiccups of the baby. She finally found her voice. Why would you do that? You don't even know what kind of person I am. His jaw flexed. I know what kind of person forgets to eat so their kid doesn't have to. That shut her up. He looked down the street, where no bus was coming. Then back at her. You shouldn't be sitting here. It's late. I'm fine. You're not. His tone wasn't harsh. It was the kind of certainty that came from someone used to being obeyed. Come on. I'll give you a ride home. Thelma's stomach tightened. No, thank you. Really. We'll wait for the bus. You'll be waiting a while, he said, glancing at his watch. Last one was 30 minutes ago. She frowned, uncertain if he was bluffing. We'll manage. He stepped closer, the scent of rain and faint cologne surrounding him. It's freezing. Your baby's shaking. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know this man, not really. Every instinct screamed to keep her distance. But there was something in his voice, an authority tempered by restraint, that made her hesitate. He gestured toward a black car parked under a flickering streetlight. The windows were tinted, the kind of car that didn't belong in her part of town. A driver waited inside, hands neatly folded on the steering wheel. Thelma bit her lip. You some kind of cop? He almost smiled. Not exactly. Then what are you? Someone who doesn't like seeing a kid go hungry. She looked down at Adeline, her tiny fingers clinging to her coat. The baby's eyes were half-lidded, tired, but her lips still searched instinctively for food. Please, he said quietly, let me do this. It wasn't a command this time. It was almost human. She nodded once, reluctantly. Fine, but just a ride. That's it. He gave a brief nod and gestured to his driver. The man stepped out immediately, opening the back door. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. The leather seats smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. She hesitated before sitting, still clutching Adeline tight. The baby's cries softened as the heat wrapped around them both. Lucky slid in beside her, his movements composed, almost too controlled. The car hummed to life, smooth and quiet. For a long stretch, no one spoke. The wipers beat a steady rhythm across the windshield. The city outside blurred, neon signs, wet streets, passing strangers who'd never know this moment had happened. She stared down at the can of formula resting in her lap. You didn't have to do this. He didn't look at her. Didn't have to. Wanted to. Why? He exhaled through his nose, eyes fixed on the road ahead. You ever do something just because it felt right? She gave a humorless laugh. Right doesn't usually feed a baby. He turned then, his gaze steady, unreadable. No, but sometimes it keeps the soul from starving. The words lingered in the air between them, strange, unexpected, almost too intimate. The car slowed as they reached her neighborhood. Broken streetlights, peeling paint. A flicker of fear crossed her face, embarrassed for him to see the world she lived in. Here, she said quickly. You can drop me off at the corner. He didn't respond, just signaled to his driver, who stopped beside a cracked curb. She reached for the door handle, but hesitated. Thank you, she murmured again, her voice soft but firm this time. But please don't come back. Lucky's eyes darkened slightly. Wasn't planning on it. But they both knew he was lying. She stepped out into the drizzle, clutching Adeline close. The street swallowed her up, one shadow among many. Lucky watched until she disappeared through a rusted gate, a single porch light flickering to life behind her. He sat there for a long time, silent, his reflection blurred in the rain-streaked glass. He'd walked away from countless lives. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, walking away felt like a sin. One decision, one ride, one stranger's kindness can rewrite a life's entire script. If you walked away here, imagine the regret. Don't walk away from stories that hit this deep. Subscribe, because some chances only come once. The city never really slept. It just changed faces. By the time Lucky's car rolled back through the rain-soaked streets, the neon had dulled into a restless haze. The wipers swept across the windshield in rhythmic silence, the hum of the engine a low growl beneath the night's chill. Lucky sat in the back seat, unmoving, his gaze fixed on nothing and everything at once. The image of that woman, the single mother with trembling hands and a crying baby, wouldn't leave him. He'd seen men die in front of him without blinking. But that look in her eyes, that quiet kind of defeat, had sunk under his skin like a splinter. The driver cleared his throat softly. "Boss." Lucky didn't respond right away. The driver hesitated, then said, "I saw the name on her mailbox." "Todd." The word snapped something in Lucky's mind. His head turned, slow and deliberate. "What did you say?" The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Todd." The name on her mailbox. "Apartment 3B. Thelma Todd." Lucky leaned back, his knuckles tightening around his lighter. A familiar burn crawled down his throat as he inhaled sharply through his teeth. "Todd," he repeated under his breath. The name hit like a ghost crawling out of the past. Henry Todd. He hadn't spoken that name in years. Not since the trial. Not since the bloodshed that followed. Lucky's mind drifted backward, unbidden. Henry Todd had been a quiet man. A bookkeeper, soft-spoken, the kind of person you could pass 100 times and never notice. But he'd noticed everything. Years ago, when the government was closing in, it was Henry who'd stumbled onto the ledgers of Salvatore Moretti, Lucky's most dangerous rival. Moretti had tried to use Henry to frame Luciano's entire operation, planting doctored numbers and false accounts that pointed straight at Lucky. But Henry had done something no one expected. He testified against Moretti instead, turning over the real evidence, the one that saved Lucky's life and sent Moretti's empire crashing down. And for that, Henry Todd paid the price. The news of his car accident had spread fast, but Lucky knew the truth. Moretti's men had made it look clean. They'd left the widow with nothing but a pension check and a gravestone. Lucky had never forgotten. He'd just buried the guilt where no one could see it. Until tonight. Now, Henry's wife sat at a bus stop, clutching a starving baby, returning her daughter's milk because she couldn't afford it. Lucky pressed the heel of his hand to his brow. He could still picture Henry's face from the courtroom that day. Nervous, pale, but steady. The man had looked death in the eye and chosen to do the right thing. Lucky hadn't done the same. He reached for a cigarette, flicked the lighter open, and took a long drag. The flame briefly lit his face. Hard lines, hollow eyes. The city glittered beyond the car window, indifferent and endless. "You died protecting me," he muttered, voice low and hoarse. "Now I protect her." The driver didn't ask what he meant. He'd learned long ago that silence was safer than curiosity. Lucky flicked his ash out the window. "Pull over." The car eased to a stop near the edge of the river, where the skyline shimmered across the black water. Lucky stepped out, collar up against the wind. He stared out at the glowing horizon, the empire he'd built on loyalty, fear, and violence, and wondered how much of it he'd ever really deserved. He took another slow drag and let the smoke curl through his words. "You think you get used to owing the dead," he murmured, "but you don't." By the time he climbed back into the car, his decision was already made. "Rossi," he said to the driver, his tone all business now. You remember the woman from tonight? Yes, boss. You're going to make sure she doesn't have to return another can of milk again. Understand. Rossi nodded immediately. Of course. What should I? Quietly, Lucky interrupted. No one knows. No names. No trail. Rent's paid. Bills cleared. Groceries. Whatever she needs, it shows up. But she doesn't find out where it came from. Understood. Lucky leaned his head against the window. The rain had softened to a mist, blurring the world outside into streaks of light and shadow. And Rossi. If anyone touches her, they answer to me. The driver swallowed hard. Got it, boss. Lucky's voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. That includes our own. The car fell silent again, save for the steady rhythm of tires against wet asphalt. But inside, Lucky's mind churned. Every rule he'd lived by, don't get involved, don't look back, don't owe anyone, was unraveling. He could almost hear Henry's voice again, quiet and steadfast, saying the same thing he had the day of the trial. Sometimes, Mr. Luciano, you don't do it because it's smart. You do it because it's right. Lucky had scoffed at him then. But now, standing at the top of his own kingdom, surrounded by the ghosts that built it, he finally understood. He'd spent years paying for his sins with money and power. Tonight, he'd start paying with something real. He opened his phone and dialed another number. Mendoza, he said. You still got connections with the landlord on 5th and Howard? Yeah, boss. The one with the busted fire escape. That's the one. You tell him Mrs. Todd's rent's covered. 6 months in advance. No questions. On it. Lucky hung up and stared at the dark screen for a long moment before slipping it back into his pocket. He thought about that tiny apartment, the peeling paint, the cracked concrete steps. He thought about the baby's faint cries in the rain, about the woman's trembling hands pushing the can of formula across the counter. It wasn't pity driving him. It was debt, and debts had to be paid. Back at his penthouse, Lucky poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. The glass sat untouched on the desk as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city pulse below. From this height, it almost looked peaceful. Streets like veins, cars like blood cells. The illusion of control. He knew better. He'd built his power on loyalty, on men who killed and lied for him without hesitation. But tonight, as he stared at the city Henry Todd had once saved, he wondered if loyalty meant something different now. Maybe it wasn't about fear or blood. Maybe, just this once, it was about doing right by the dead. He crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, watching the ember fade to gray. Rest easy, Henry, he murmured. Your girl's safe now. Outside, the city's heartbeat carried on. But somewhere, deep in the maze of its alleys and rooftops, a new story had quietly begun, one written not in violence, but in redemption disguised as vengeance. And for the first time in years, Charles Lucky Luciano allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could still balance the scales. The rumors started small, just whispers that drifted like cigarette smoke through the cracked walls of Thelma Todd's building. It began the week her overdue rent mysteriously vanished from the landlord's ledger. Then her flickering hallway bulb was replaced overnight. The next morning, a box of groceries sat at her door, stacked neatly with fresh fruit, bread, and the same brand of baby formula she had once returned in shame. Thelma stared at it for a long time before daring to bring it inside. No note, no sender, just quiet generosity wrapped in mystery. At first, she told herself it had to be a mistake, a charity mix-up, some program she'd unknowingly been added to. But then the pattern continued. Her electric bill stopped arriving. Her debts disappeared. And every Friday morning, an envelope slid under her door. Always the same, plain white, with her name written in neat block letters. Inside, cash. Enough to get by. Never too much. Always just enough. Thelma's stomach turned each time she found one. Gratitude and fear tangled inside her chest like wire. Someone was helping her, but who? And why? Across town, in the high-rise suite overlooking the river, Charles Lucky Luciano stood before his window, the city spread beneath him like a chessboard. He lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. Below, headlights crawled through the rain like tiny fireflies lost in the dark. Vito Morelli entered without knocking, as always. He was a thick, heavy man with a gold watch that gleamed even in the dim light. His grin was the kind that had knives. You've been quiet lately, Vito said, leaning against the doorframe. Too quiet. The boys are starting to talk. Lucky didn't look at him. Let them. They say you've gone soft, Vito pressed. Say you're spending money on things that don't concern us. Lucky exhaled a stream of smoke, slow and calm. You hear a lot of things when you spend all your time listening to fools. Vito chuckled, but there was no humor in it. This isn't like you, boss. Rent payments? Grocery deliveries? Come on. We deal in territory, not charity. Lucky turned then, eyes sharp as glass. You've been checking my accounts, Vito? I keep tabs on everything that moves through this family, Vito said with a shrug. That's my job. Lucky stepped closer. The air between them thickened. Your job, he said quietly, is to make sure my word gets obeyed, not questioned. Vito's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. I'm just saying, you start handing out mercy, people stop fearing you. Fear's what keeps us on top. Lose that, and you lose everything. Lucky's expression didn't change, but his voice softened, dangerously. Maybe fear's overrated. Vito's brows knit. What's that supposed to mean? Lucky turned back to the window. It means maybe it's time I stop wearing a crown that costs so many souls to keep polished. For a long moment, Vito said nothing. Then he let out a low whistle. You're slipping, Charlie. Sympathy's how kings lose their crowns. Lucky gave a faint, humorless smile. Then maybe it's time I stop wearing it. The underboss frowned. You forget what this life takes from the weak. You start feeling sorry for one person, next thing you know you're bleeding for everyone. That's not who you are. Lucky's gaze darkened. You sure about that? Vito studied him carefully, searching for the man he used to know, the one who ruled the city through fear, who never blinked at blood. What he saw instead unsettled him, a man haunted, not hollow. That same night, in a cramped diner on 5th Street, Thelma wiped down the last counter. The rain outside tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. Her shift had dragged, and exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. She was closing up when a man she didn't recognize walked in. Rough face, shark eyes. He slid into a booth without ordering, fingers drumming the table. You Thelma Todd? He asked. She froze. Who's asking? He smirked, flashing a gold tooth. Name's Dante. Your late husband owed some people money. Guess who owns that debt now? Thelma's pulse jumped. That was years ago. I don't. He leaned forward, voice low and cruel. Doesn't matter. Debt don't die with the dead. It follows the living. He slid a crumpled note across the table, a demand written in smeared ink. You got a week, he said, standing. Or your kid learns what happens when people don't pay. Her blood turned to ice. By the time she found her voice, he was gone. She closed early that night, locking the door twice before walking home. Her mind raced. She didn't have that kind of money. Not even close. At her apartment, she laid Adeline in her crib and tried to calm herself, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound in the hallway made her flinch. Around midnight, she thought she heard footsteps, then a car door closing, then silence. Morning came gray and heavy. When Thelma stepped outside, the street was cordoned off with police tape. Neighbors whispered on the sidewalk. Someone was dead. The name passed through the crowd like static. Dante Marino, found behind the old mill. Thelma's knees almost gave out. She hurried back inside, heart hammering. That's when she saw it. An envelope under her door. The same kind as always, but heavier this time. Inside was more money than she'd ever seen at once. Enough to pay for months of rent, groceries, everything. There was no note. But she didn't need one. She already knew. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone powerful. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. At the penthouse, Vito stormed into Lucky's office again. You had Marino taken care of, didn't you? Lucky didn't look up from his papers. He was threatening someone who didn't deserve it. She owed money. Vito barked. You think you can just rewrite the rules for her? Lucky's voice dropped low. I just did. Vito stared at him. This ain't you, boss. You start protecting nobodies, you'll drag us all down with you. Lucky's jaw tightened, but his tone was calm. You worry too much. I worry because you're acting like you got a conscience now. And that, Vito said, leaning in close, is bad for business. Lucky smiled faintly, that cold half-smile that used to terrify men twice Vito's size. Maybe business has been bad for the soul. Vito scowled. You keep talking like that, you'll end up in a grave instead of a penthouse. Lucky turned away, his reflection framed against the skyline. We all end up there eventually. For the first time, Vito didn't have a comeback. He just stood there, uncertain, watching a man he no longer understood. That night, Lucky stood again at his window, smoke curling around him. Somewhere miles away, Thelma Todd was probably sleeping easier than she had in years. He told himself it was repayment. Nothing more. But deep down, he knew better. The city thrived on cruelty, and he'd been its architect for too long. Maybe protecting her was his way of testing whether there was still anything human left inside him. He took one last drag of his cigarette and crushed it out, watching the ember fade. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, swallowed by rain. Lucky whispered into the glass, his reflection barely recognizable. "You're safe now, Mrs. Todd. No one touches you. Not while I'm still breathing. You never know who's watching your struggle, or how close your next miracle is." Missing stories like this means missing proof that compassion still survives the darkest streets. Don't risk tuning out hope. Subscribe. The diner was nearly empty that night. The hum of the refrigerator and the low crackle of a radio, the only sounds filling the space. Outside, the rain came down in thin, steady sheets, streaking the glass windows and blurring the city beyond. Thelma wiped down the counter for the 5th time, not because it needed cleaning, but because it kept her hands busy. Her shift was almost over. The last customer had left an hour ago, leaving behind a few crumpled bills and a half-finished cup of coffee. Adeline slept in her carrier beside the counter, a soft sigh rising and falling from her tiny chest. The baby's presence was her anchor, the quiet reminder that even in this hard, gray world, something innocent still breathed. The bell above the door chimed. Thelma looked up and froze. Charles, Lucky, Luciano stepped inside like a shadow slipping in from the rain. His black suit was immaculate despite the storm. A faint sheen of water clung to his hair, and the scent of cigarettes and cologne followed him like a signature. He didn't belong here. That much was obvious. This was a place for truckers, night shift workers, and lost souls. He was none of those. And yet, here he was. Thelma's pulse quickened. "We're closed," she said quietly, though the words trembled. Lucky's eyes flicked toward the open sign, still glowing faintly in the window. "Doesn't look like it." She hesitated. "We're about to close." He gave a small nod, as if to acknowledge her courage. Then he took a seat at the counter. "Then I won't take long." For a moment, neither spoke. Thelma poured coffee automatically, her movements stiff and mechanical. She could feel his gaze, steady, unreadable. When she finally turned toward him, her voice cracked under the weight of days of confusion and fear. "You've got people scaring off my landlord." Lucky didn't answer immediately. He stirred his coffee once, twice. "Do I?" She frowned. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. My bills disappearing, my rent paid, strangers watching my door. That's you, isn't it?" Lucky's gaze lifted. There it was again, that intensity that seemed to cut through pretense. "Yes," he said simply. Thelma's breath hitched. "Why?" He looked past her, to the baby sleeping by the counter. His expression softened, just barely. "Because your husband saved my life." The words hit like a quiet explosion. My husband?" she stammered. "You knew Henry?" Lucky leaned back in the stool, his eyes shadowed by the dim light. "Not personally, but I knew what he did. Years ago, your husband stood up in court against a man who was supposed to destroy me. He testified, took the fall for something that wasn't his to carry." Thelma's hands trembled. "I don't understand." "He protected me," Lucky said, his voice low, steady. "Without knowing it. He gave me time to rebuild, to survive. He died for that choice. And he hesitated, something rare flickering in his eyes. "I never forgot." Thelma stepped back, struggling to process it all. "You're saying my husband helped you?" "In his own way," Lucky said. "He didn't even know who I was. But his testimony took down a man who wanted me gone. It saved everything I had. And now you think you can just pay me off to clear your conscience?" She snapped, voice rising despite herself. Lucky didn't flinch. "No, I'm not buying anything. I'm paying a debt." Thelma's throat tightened. "You think kindness from a man like you doesn't come with a price?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe not kindness. Maybe penance." Silence filled the diner. The rain outside had turned heavier, drumming against the roof like restless fingers. For the first time, Thelma looked at him, not as the man everyone feared, not as a figure from whispered stories, but as something else. A man hollowed by ghosts. His eyes weren't cold. They were tired. And somewhere deep beneath that polished armor of control, she saw something she didn't expect: remorse. Lucky stood then, pulling a folded bill from his wallet and placing it on the counter. He didn't touch his coffee. You shouldn't have to worry about men like your landlord, or debt collectors, or anyone else who thinks they can take from you. I don't want your protection, she said, her voice breaking. He met her gaze. You already have it. For a long moment, the two just stood there, two broken worlds colliding in a fragile moment of understanding neither asked for. Then, soft as a confession, she whispered, "Who are you, really?" Lucky's lips curved into a faint smile. Someone trying to remember what it feels like to do one good thing. He turned toward the door. Thelma's hand brushed against the baby's carrier as if grounding herself in something real. "Please," she said, "don't come back." Lucky paused, his reflection caught in the rain-streaked glass. "You think the world gets better by pretending we don't owe each other anything?" Her silence was answer enough. He walked out into the storm. Later that night, in a smoky bar deep in the heart of Little Sicily, Vito Morelli watched his boss from across the room. Lucky sat in the corner booth, alone, a drink untouched before him. When Vito finally approached, his tone was sharp. "You were seen at the diner again." Lucky didn't look up. So, Vito echoed, incredulous. "You think no one's paying attention? People are starting to talk." "You're slipping, Charlie." Lucky exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. "Talking's all people do when they've got nothing worth saying." Vito's jaw clenched. "This isn't a joke. You can't afford distractions. That woman's nothing but trouble. She's making you soft." Lucky's gaze lifted, cold steel now. "Soft?" "Yeah," Vito said. "Since when does the great Lucky Luciano run errands for a widow with a baby? You used to run this city. Now you're out here playing guardian angel." Lucky leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice calm but dangerous. "You ever lose something that reminded you you're still human, Vito?" Vito scoffed. "I lost plenty. Didn't turn into a priest because of it." Lucky smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's why you'll never understand." "Understand what?" "That she's not the distraction," Lucky said. "She's the reminder." Vito shook his head, disgusted. "You're throwing away your crown for some nobody. People already smell blood. Rivals are watching. You keep this up, and they'll come for you." Lucky's smile vanished. "Let them." Vito stared, caught off guard by the finality in his tone. Lucky's gaze drifted toward the window, where rain blurred the neon lights into streaks of red and white. "If helping one person costs me the kingdom," he said quietly, "then maybe it was never worth keeping." Vito didn't respond. He just turned and walked out, muttering curses under his breath. Lucky sat there for a long time after he was gone, the echo of Thelma's voice still in his head. "Don't come back." He knew he should listen, but the truth was, it was already too late. She had cracked something inside him that no one else had ever touched. And once a man like him starts feeling again, that's when the real danger begins. The storm had not stopped for 2 days. It clawed at the city like something feral, rain slicing through the skyline, washing filth from the streets that would never truly be clean. Inside his penthouse, Lucky stood by the window, cigarette burning to its filter, untouched glass of scotch sweating on the table beside him. The city pulsed below, his empire, his kingdom. And yet, for the first time, it felt hollow. He hadn't seen Thelma in weeks. He told himself that was good, that she needed distance, that he'd done enough. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, worn, determined, alive. Behind him, Vito Morelli's voice broke the quiet. "Boss, we got business." Lucky didn't turn. "Handle it." Vito hesitated. "This ain't the kind of business you ignore." Lucky exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "Then talk." "She's a liability," Vito said flatly. "That woman. She's got eyes on her now. The feds sniffing around, rival families watching your moves. They think you're slipping. That she's your weak spot." Lucky finally turned, his expression unreadable. "She's under my protection." "That's exactly the problem." Vito stepped closer, his voice sharp with frustration. "You've forgotten who you are, Charlie. The streets don't care about your conscience. They only respect fear." Lucky's jaw tightened. "You think fear built this city?" Vito sneered. "Fear keeps it standing." Silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Then Lucky spoke, calm, low, final. "You so much as look in her direction again, I'll bury you myself." Vito's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but he nodded, slow and mocking. "Sure thing, boss." Whatever you say. That night, while Lucky met with the dock's union heads, Vito made his move. Two black sedans pulled up in front of Thelma's apartment just past midnight. Rain still fell in unbroken sheets. The men stepped out, silent, efficient, shadows trained to do the dirty work their boss no longer had the stomach for. Inside, Thelma was half asleep on the couch, Adeline resting in her crib. The creak of the front door jolted her upright. She froze. The sound wasn't the familiar settling of old wood. It was deliberate, intrusive. Her heart hammered. Who's there? No answer. Then, a hand on the doorknob. The metallic click of a lock turning. Thelma scooped up her baby and backed toward the kitchen, her voice trembling. Please, whoever you are, don't come any closer. The door burst open. Three men in dark coats flooded the small apartment. Their faces were hidden beneath hats and shadows. One grabbed her by the arm, wrenching her back as Adeline began to cry. Don't fight, the man hissed. We're not here for you, lady. Just following orders. Orders? She gasped. Whose? A cloth pressed over her mouth cut the question short. The world spun, blurred, then went black. Hours later, Lucky returned home. The storm had quieted to a low drizzle, but thunder still rolled in the distance like the echo of something unfinished. He tossed his jacket onto the sofa, exhaustion pulling at him. He poured another drink, then paused. Something inside him prickled. He picked up the phone. Get Marco, he ordered. When his driver answered, his tone was strange. Hesitant. Boss, you might want to sit down. Lucky's gut went cold. Say it. It's Thelma. Her door was busted open. Place trashed. Kid's crib flipped. Lucky's heart stopped. And her. Gone, Marco said quietly. They're both gone. For a moment, Lucky couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the hum of the line, the ticking of the clock, and the taste of metal at the back of his throat. Then Marco added, There's something else. A note. Lucky's voice was a growl. Read it. If you want them back, come alone. No signature. The phone cracked in Lucky's hand. He hurled it across the room, the glass shattering against the marble floor. Vito. He didn't need confirmation. He could smell the betrayal in every word. Lucky strode to the hidden compartment in his study, flipping open the false panel where he kept his weapons. He stopped, staring at the rows of polished steel and black metal glinting beneath the lamplight. Then he closed the drawer. No weapons. Just rage. The warehouse sat at the edge of the docks. One of Lucky's old fronts before the city made him a myth. It was where deals were made and debts were paid in blood. Now, it waited for him like a grave. His footsteps echoed through the rain as he entered, hands empty, eyes burning with something that felt ancient. The moment he stepped into the open, a voice floated from the shadows. Well, the great Charles Luciano still thinks he's the king. Vito emerged, smirking beneath the flickering light. Behind him, Thelma was bound to a chair, Adeline wrapped in a blanket beside her. Lucky's heart twisted at the sight, but his face remained stone. You shouldn't have done this, he said quietly. Vito laughed. You left me no choice. You were turning into a liability. A bleeding heart with a gun. I told you not to touch her. And you told me a lot of things, boss. Vito's grin widened. But this was the final lesson. You don't mix business with weakness. Lucky took a step closer. You think killing her will make you strong? It'll make me free, Vito snarled. Free of your mercy, your rules, your ghost of a conscience. Thelma struggled against her ropes, tears streaking her face. Please, don't do this. Lucky's voice dropped to a whisper that carried through the air like thunder. Let her go, Vito. Vito cocked his head. Or what? You'll kill me? You came here with nothing. Lucky's lips twitched. You sure about that? Vito hesitated. The faint sound of footsteps filled the space, soft, synchronized, coming from every direction. Lucky's men. The same loyal few who'd followed him through every war, every betrayal, every blood-soaked street. Vito's smirk faded. You said you came alone. I lied. Lucky's hand shot out, grabbing the gun tucked in Vito's belt. A struggle erupted, brief, brutal, final. One shot. Vito fell hard, his own weapon clattering to the ground. Lucky stood over him, chest heaving. I built this empire with men who understood loyalty. You forgot what that means. Vito tried to speak, blood pooling at his lips. She made you weak. Lucky's eyes burned like fire. No, she reminded me what it means to be strong. He turned to Thelma, cutting her ropes. helping her to her feet. Her hands shook as she clutched Adeline to her chest. Lucky brushed a strand of hair from her face, his own expression unreadable. "You're safe now." Outside, the rain finally began to stop, the storm breaking into quiet. But in Lucky's chest, another kind of storm was just beginning. One built on guilt, fury, and a truth he could no longer outrun. He had tried to protect her from his world. Now, his world had come for her anyway, and someone was going to pay for it. You see how fast good people disappear when evil wins? Don't blink. Don't scroll. Subscribe, because stories like this remind us what happens when silence lets cruelty breathe. The docks slept under a bruised sky. Rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering against the rusted roofs of the warehouses that lined the waterfront. The ocean beyond churned with the same fury that burned inside Charles "Lucky" Luciano as he stepped out of his black sedan and into the storm. His coat clung to his shoulders, soaked through within seconds, but he didn't care. The wind tore at him, salt and rain whipping across his face. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, Thelma and her baby were waiting, hostages in a war that never should have reached them. Lucky's men waited in the car behind him, watching silently. Marco leaned forward from the driver's seat, voice tight. "Boss, you sure you don't want backup?" Lucky didn't turn. "I said alone." "Charlie." Lucky's gaze cut sharp through the rain. "You bring them in, she dies. This is between me and Vito." He pushed forward, each step echoing through puddles and empty steel corridors. The smell of oil, damp wood, and gunpowder filled the air, ghosts of old deals and bloodier nights. He had built his empire here, once upon a time. Tonight, he would bury part of it. The warehouse loomed ahead, its wide doors cracked open like the mouth of a waiting beast. Yellow light spilled out in narrow stripes, slicing through the darkness. He entered without hesitation. Inside, shadows moved along the concrete floor. The smell of mildew mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Chains rattled softly in the rafters. And there, in the corner, was Thelma. She sat bound to a chair, her wrists raw, her face pale and streaked with tears. Baby Adeline was wrapped in a blanket at her feet, crying softly, her small voice breaking the silence like glass. The sound hit Lucky harder than any bullet could. Vito Morelli stepped out from behind a stack of crates, smirking beneath the flickering light. The gun in his hand gleamed cold and wet. "I was starting to think you didn't care," Vito said. "But look at this. The king himself, walking in without a crown, without a gun." Almost poetic. Lucky's voice was calm, steady. "Let them go." Vito laughed. "No hello. No apology for threatening to bury me alive." He tilted his head toward Thelma. "You'd risk your life for her?" Lucky's eyes flicked to Thelma, then back. "She's the only pure thing left in this rotten city." The words hung there, heavy, final. Vito barked a laugh, though something uneasy flickered behind his grin. "You've gone soft, old man. You used to rule this city. Now look at you, bleeding heart, chasing ghosts." Lucky took a slow step forward. "You talk too much." "Stay where you are," Vito snapped, raising the gun. "One more step, and I put a hole in your redemption story." Lucky stopped, rainwater dripping from his hair, his eyes never leaving Vito's. "You always were too eager to play God with other people's lives." "Someone has to," Vito sneered. "You forgot what fear feels like." "Me? I never did." He raised the gun, and the world erupted. Gunfire split the silence, echoing off metal walls like thunder. Lucky dove behind a crate, the first bullet tearing through his coat, grazing his shoulder. The air filled with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Vito shouted orders to his men, but the response was silence. Outside, Lucky's loyal few had already moved in, quietly dismantling Vito's backup before the storm began. "Where are they?" Vito yelled, panic edging into his voice. Lucky stepped from the smoke, face grim, one hand clutching his bleeding arm. "You never did count loyalty right, Vito." He lunged. The struggle was vicious, close, raw, and real. Vito swung the gun like a club, catching Lucky across the jaw. Lucky countered, slamming him into a wall. They grappled, rainwater and blood mixing beneath their boots. The gun went off again, once, twice, deafening in the confined space. Then silence. Vito staggered back, clutching his chest. His eyes widened, disbelieving, as crimson bloomed beneath his shirt. Lucky stood still, chest heaving, the smoking gun in his hand. His expression was neither triumph nor relief, only sorrow. You should have stayed loyal, Lucky said quietly. Vito's lips twisted into a final bitter grin. Loyalty's just another word for weakness. He fell to his knees, then forward, hitting the concrete with a dull thud. The sound echoed, a full stop at the end of a chapter. Lucky let the gun clatter from his hand. He turned to Thelma, cutting through the ropes with trembling fingers. She fell against him, clutching Adeline to her chest, her sobs raw and unrestrained. I thought you weren't coming, she whispered. I told you, he said, voice hoarse. You're safe now. She looked up at him, at the blood on his shoulder, the pain etched in his face. You're hurt. Doesn't matter, he murmured. Let's get you out of here. He lifted her gently, one arm steadying her, the other cradling Adeline's small form against his chest. Together, they stepped out into the rain. Outside, the storm had reached its peak. Sheets of water blurred the horizon, streetlights glowing like ghosts through the mist. Lucky led them through puddles and broken glass, every step heavier than the last. Behind them, the warehouse stood like a tomb, flames licking through the windows where a stray bullet had sparked a fire. The rain hissed as it met the rising smoke, the air thick with the scent of burning oil. Thelma clung to him, whispering, Is it over? Lucky didn't answer right away. From the distance came the wail of sirens, high and sharp, growing louder. The city's judgment, closing in. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and distant. It's over for him, he said softly. Not for us. Red and blue lights began to flash across the dock, reflecting in the water like fractured stars. Lucky took one last look at the warehouse, at the wreckage of everything he'd built and destroyed, then handed Thelma a folded envelope from his coat. What is this? She asked. New names, he said. New life. Take her far from here. She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. I can't just leave you. You have to. His voice broke then, just barely. They'll come for me next. But not for you. Not if you disappear. She reached for him, but he stepped back. I'll handle the cops, he said, forcing a faint smile. You handle her future. Thelma's sobs deepened as Marco's car screeched up beside them. Lucky opened the door, helping her inside, tucking Adeline securely in her arms. The car pulled away just as the sirens grew louder, the storm swallowing its taillights. Lucky turned to face the flashing lights approaching the dock, his silhouette framed by fire and rain. For the first time in his life, he didn't run. He stood there, bleeding, unarmed, unafraid, as the city he had once ruled closed in. And in that moment, Charles Lucky Luciano was no longer a king, or a criminal, or a name whispered in fear. He was just a man who had chosen, finally, to do one right thing, no matter the cost. The storm fades, but the echo of his choice lingers, a promise, a reckoning, a legacy about to be written. The city stretched out beneath Lucky's penthouse like a broken promise, glittering, hollow, and restless. From up here, the world looked peaceful. But the peace was a lie, the kind that only came before the storm. Charles Lucky Luciano stood by the glass wall, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers, eyes fixed on the horizon. The skyline was drowning in fog, but he could still see the flashing lights far below, the silent reminder that time was running out. Behind him, Thelma Todd's voice broke the stillness. Why me? Lucky didn't move. The question hung in the air, trembling. Why risk everything? She continued, her voice raw. For someone like me. You could have walked away that night at the store. You should have. Lucky exhaled a slow cloud of smoke, watching it fade into the reflection of his own face. Older now, harder, tired. Because your husband died to keep me alive. Thelma froze. He turned, finally meeting her eyes. The weight of years, of sins, debts, and ghosts, sat heavy in his stare. Henry Todd was supposed to hand over financial records to the feds. He knew they'd trace everything back to me. But he changed his testimony. Gave them my rival instead. Thelma's breath caught. You're saying he protected you? Lucky nodded. He bought me time. Enough time to rebuild, to survive. I didn't know it then, but his silence cost him his life. Tears welled in her eyes. He never told me. He just said he was doing the right thing. Lucky's gaze softened. He did, and he paid the price for it. Now I'm paying mine. She took a step closer. You didn't owe me anything. You could have sent someone else. You could have just left us alone. He looked past her, toward the baby sleeping in the adjoining room. You remind me there's still something worth saving. I built an empire on blood and fear. But when I saw you hand back that can of milk, when I saw you refuse to break even when the world spat in your face, I realized I'd forgotten what strength really looked like. Thelma's voice trembled. Strength? I was desperate. He shook his head. No, you were human. I just forgot how to be. Silence filled the penthouse, thick, suffocating. The rain outside had slowed, but thunder still rolled faintly in the distance. Thelma crossed her arms, her voice small. So what happens now? Lucky stubbed out his cigarette, the ember dying in the ashtray. Now, he said, you leave. Her eyes widened. What? He turned to his desk, flipping open a folder. You and Adeline. You'll have new names, new passports. There's a car waiting downstairs. You'll drive north to Montreal, then take a plane to Florence. There's a small apartment already waiting. She shook her head, disbelief hardening into anger. You think I'm just going to run away while you stay here and die? Lucky didn't answer. He sat at his desk, typing on the old laptop, the glow from the screen reflecting against the glass. There's money, he murmured. Enough for both of you to live without worry. It'll be transferred to an account under her name. Adeline Luciano, no ties, no records. Just a clean start. Tears spilled down Thelma's cheeks. You can't fix this by throwing money at it. He smiled faintly, a hollow, broken thing. It's all I've ever known how to throw. She took a step closer. You could come with us. His hands froze over the keyboard. I can't, he said quietly. Why not? She demanded. You've already lost everything else. Because if I run, they'll follow, he said, his voice low, steady. And when they find me, they'll find you. The feds, the families, the ones who want revenge. It doesn't matter which side. They'll all want a piece of me. And I won't let them touch what's left of something good. He looked at her again, really looked. Her hair damp from the rain, her eyes fierce despite the fear. She wasn't just the woman from the grocery store anymore. She was the only person who'd ever made him want to be better. She realized it, too. Her voice broke. You're going to let them take you. He gave a small nod. Someone has to end this. Might as well be me. Thelma's hand trembled as she reached out to him. Lucky. He caught her hand gently, pressing it between his own. The night I met you, I saw a mother choosing love over pride. I saw something pure in a city that's lost its soul. You don't know what that did to me. She shook her head, crying now. Don't talk like this. I have to, he said softly. Because the moment I let you walk away, I'll finally have done one good thing that can't be undone. From somewhere below, the faint echo of sirens rose, distant but drawing closer. Thelma stiffened. They're coming. I know, Lucky said. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the lights flashing through the fog. The FBI's been building their case for years. Rival families tipped them off the minute Vito's body hit the floor. He turned back to her, calm now, almost peaceful. Go. Before they get here. She didn't move. I can't leave you like this. Yes, you can, he said gently. Because she deserves better. And you deserve a life that isn't built on ashes. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter, sealed with his initials. Give this to her when she's old enough to understand, he said. Tell her I kept a promise to her father. Thelma stared at him through tears. You're not a bad man, Lucky. He smiled faintly. Don't make the mistake of believing that. I've just had a lifetime to practice regret. The sirens were louder now. Helicopters thudded in the distance. The building shuddered with the rumble of engines and approaching footsteps. Lucky guided her to the door, his voice steady even as his heart splintered. You have 10 minutes before they lock down the streets. Take the service elevator, back exit. Marco's waiting. Thelma hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe. What will you do? He looked back toward the window. Wait. And then he smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 unsaid things. Don't look back, Thelma. She nodded, sobbing silently as she turned and disappeared down the hall. Lucky returned to his desk. He poured one last drink, the scotch trembling in his blood-stained hand. The rain started again, tapping gently against the glass. He stared out at the city, his city, and whispered, almost to himself, maybe you'll finally sleep now. The door behind him crashed open. Heavy boots thundered across the marble floor. Charles Luciano, a voice shouted. Hands where we can see them. Lucky didn't move. He set his glass down carefully, folded his hands in his lap, and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the world roared. Sirens, thunder, chaos. But in that moment, Charles, Lucky, Luciano sat still as stone, waiting for the inevitable. Not as a boss, not as a criminal, but as a man who had traded power for peace. And somewhere far away, on a road out of the city, a baby slept soundly in her mother's arms, unaware that the man who had saved her had just chosen to disappear so she never would. If redemption came for a killer, imagine what could come for you. Don't let your story end in regret. Subscribe, because even in darkness, there's always one last light. The morning sun slipped through pale curtains, dust motes dancing in its light like fragments of memory. The small apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, the kind of comforting scent that felt like home, like history. Adeline Todd sat at the worn kitchen table, her long hair tied loosely behind her. She was 22 now, her eyes a shade of storm gray that seemed to see straight through the world. On the table before her lay a small, yellowed envelope, edges softened by time. The ink faded but still legible. It had arrived that morning. No return address. Just her name, written in elegant, deliberate handwriting. Adeline Todd. And beneath it, a postmark from more than 2 decades ago. She ran her thumb over the seal, her heartbeat quickening. Her mother, Thelma, sat across from her, silent. There was something in her eyes, a quiet ache, an old fear that had never really gone away. "Mom," Adeline said softly. "It's for me." Thelma nodded, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She had known this day would come. She had known it since the night she'd driven away from the city with her baby in her arms and the ghost of a man's voice in her head. "Don't look back." Adeline broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, yellowed but intact. She unfolded it carefully, the sound of paper crisp in the quiet room. The handwriting was precise, elegant, unmistakably old-fashioned. A debt repaid. A promise kept. CL. That was all. No more words, no explanation. But it was enough. Thelma's breath caught, her eyes filling before she could stop them. "Who was he?" Adeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thelma looked at her daughter, so grown now, yet still with the same eyes she'd had as a baby. "He was someone who made sure you never went hungry," she said softly. Adeline frowned slightly. "That's not an answer." Thelma smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's the only one that matters." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the world outside, distant cars, a barking dog, the hum of life, felt far away. Thelma stood, moving to the window. "You were too young to remember," she said, staring out at the quiet street. "But there was a night when I almost gave up. I couldn't even afford milk for you. I was so ashamed." Adeline looked down at the letter again, tracing the initials with her fingertip. "CL," she murmured. "Was he the man you always said helped us once?" Thelma nodded slowly. "Yes, the man no one believed had a heart." Outside, the sunlight shifted, landing on a framed photograph on the windowsill. Thelma, younger, holding a baby in her arms. Her smile was tired but peaceful. Adeline studied her mother's reflection. "Did you love him?" Thelma's lips parted in surprise. The question wasn't meant to wound, but it pierced anyway. After a long silence, she answered, "No, but I think, maybe, he loved what we represented. A chance to start over. To do one thing right before the end." Adeline turned the letter over. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and old cologne, a scent that seemed to carry stories of rain-soaked nights and whispered regrets. "What happened to him?" Thelma didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "He made a choice," she said quietly. "One that cost him everything, so you could have a future." Adeline folded the note again and slipped it back into the envelope. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of sadness and gratitude. Somewhere deep inside, she felt as if she'd just met a man she'd known all her life. That afternoon, Adeline walked alone through the city. She followed no map, but her feet seemed to know where to go. The grocery store still stood on the corner, its sign faded, its aisles rearranged, but the same hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, cold, indifferent, timeless. She stepped inside, the bell over the door chiming softly. The cashier barely looked up. Thelma had once stood here, in this very spot, returning her baby's milk because she couldn't afford it. Adeline stood there quietly, a paper bag in her hand, the ghost of that story echoing around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in that silence, she felt it, the faint, unexplainable presence of someone watching. Not menacing, not haunting, just there. A calm warmth brushed against her chest, as if a memory she'd never lived was touching her heart. That night, she found herself in the kitchen again, her own baby cooing softly in a high chair. The child's hands reached for her as she poured milk into a small cup. The same brand. The same blue and white label her mother had once set back on a counter decades ago. Adeline smiled. "This one stays," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. Her mother watched from the doorway, eyes misting as she realized the circle had closed. Pain transformed into peace. Adeline placed the cup before her baby, leaned in, and kissed the child's head. "Someone once made sure I never went hungry," she said softly. "And I think he's still making sure you don't, either." Across town, in a bar that had seen better days, two old men nursed their drinks. One leaned close to the other and whispered, "You ever hear the story of Lucky Luciano's last deal?" The other shook his head. "They say he gave it all up for a woman and her kid. Walked into the feds' hands just so they'd live clean. Nobody's sure if it's true. But every year, someone drops a single white rose on the courthouse steps. Same day, same time." The bartender wiped the counter and smirked. "You think ghosts can keep promises?" The old man shrugged. "Some debts don't die. They just change hands." Far above the sleeping city, the moon hung low, pale and distant. Somewhere in the unseen spaces between shadows and light, a man's legacy lingered. Not in power, not in fear, but in the quiet continuation of life. Lucky Luciano's name no longer ruled the streets. His empire was dust, his crimes forgotten by most. But his act, that single act of mercy, had rippled through generations. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't come with applause. It comes quietly, years later, when a mother pours milk for her child and whispers thanks to someone she never met. Someone who once saw her as worth saving. Some legacies are written in stone. Others live in hearts, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Don't let the stories that remind us of mercy fade away. Subscribe now, before the last good man's name is forgotten.